Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another weekend workshop. We're thrilled that you are here to be a part of today's workshop on really asking an HR expert all of the things that maybe you wanted to ask, but that you weren't sure who to ask, or even if it was okay to ask sometimes. This is a space that we want to create for women entrepreneurs today to really get to the bottom of some of the questions they've been wondering about. And I know that Carey today, who is a member of the weekend community, she has brought also some of the top commonly asked questions as well, so that if those didn't occur to us, we might just want to take some notes depending on what our stage of business is, and then apply those as we go. So as we do every time, we would love for you to take a moment to introduce yourselves in the Zoom chat. This is a great networking opportunity as much as it is an opportunity to learn. So why don't you do that? Let us know where you're connecting from, what your business is. If you have a link and you'd like to put that into the Zoom chat, you never know. There might be clients or customers who are on this call right now. We have people who do online businesses. We have people who have bricks and mortar on the call, I know. So all sorts of different types of businesses. So I will leave it to you to use the Zoom chat for that purpose. Carey, I just want to thank you for agreeing to do this workshop. I know you're going to do the land acknowledgement today. So I'm going to hand you the virtual microphone. Thank you so much for, first of all, being a part of the weekend community, and secondly, sharing your knowledge with us here today. So over to you. Thanks so much, and let's dive in.
So, excuse me, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat, so if I'm doing the annoying, just bear with me. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name's Carey. I am a certified human resources leader, CHRL. I've been in HR probably for about 20 years. My career path has not been straight. It's had some curves. I've worked with public not-for-profits, private sector, small organizations, medium-sized organizations, and often the theme in my career has been times of change, organizational change, business line change, startup businesses. And about a year ago, I decided to become my own business owner. So I'm probably navigating some of the challenges that you're navigating every day and learning day to day to day. And so I'm very thankful to be part of Weekend Network and to have this discussion today. So I'm hoping we can have a discussion. We have some questions that we can talk about rather than me just speaking at you. I may have knowledge and expertise to share, but each business, you have your own knowledge of what that means. So excited to get started. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Kingston's situated on the traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and I'm grateful to be able to live and learn on these lands. So we, as Carey said, we had received some questions in advance, and this is one of them. But before I answer this question or we have a discussion, I just wanted to lead with a little bit about human resources, what people think it is, what it is, what it isn't, the social media versions of it, and to just give kind of like a overview of how employee relations or that employment relationship is governed in Ontario. So many people will think, oh, HR is the fun police, or they're like the compliance police of the business, right? Like we get that all the time. There's all these memes. HR is not your friend. Well, of course, we're not your friend. We're your business partner. But that's often a perception of what HR does. For entrepreneurs and small business, the function for you and the function of HR is we're business partner and risk management advisor, right? So as you are doing accounting and your cash flows, it's a similar thing with human resources, right? Because if you're employing people, then that is a resource that needs to be managed, and you need to manage the risk about it to protect yourself and your business. And there are errors that you can avoid by thinking out, is this an employee? Is this a contractor? And thinking through how things are governed to enable you to mitigate risk in the future and to make sure that your business is protected. So that's how I see it. If you want to ask questions, just put up your hand or shout them out as I continue if something comes to mind. So one thing that I've noticed with some clients that they sometimes, I don't want to say get wrong, but make an error. There is a very different way between a non-unionized and a unionized working environment. And so when you're looking for resources and templates, you need to be very sure that these are not meant for a unionized environment. Because in a unionized environment, everything is governed by the collective agreement, and those policies, procedures, the way that they move through things is directly linked to that collective agreement. And so I've seen small business owners use templates that were meant for a unionized environment that use specific terms like a grievance, or, you're going to say that you don't agree with a process, which will cause risk and undue administrative burden when you do not have a union. So it's just being clear about that is one thing that I've seen. Non-union environments are governed by the Employment Standards Act, and that's legislation in Ontario, as well as the Human Rights Act. And then there's the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and then there's Workplace Safety and Insurance Board Act, and the Privacy Acts. There's probably about 10 acts that you just need to be aware of that governs that relationship. And then within that, there are levels. So Employment Standards Act is legislation, Occupational Health Safety Act, all the things I just talked about are legislation. And the Employment Standards Act, I think, has been updated about 8 times during the current provincial government. So that's just, it's hard to stay on top of, but it's always online and you can read it. I find it's easy to read and digest. If there's something that you're not certain, that's where you may ask someone who has experience in HR. If it's a really serious issue, you may look to legal, but usually an experienced HR person can answer most of those questions. So that's the legislation piece. The other piece is the interpretation of the legislation. So you have the legislation, but then you have things called tribunals, and like the Human Rights Tribunal, for unionized environment, the Ontario Labor Relations Tribunal. So you have a tribunal, and then you have courts. So what makes things complicated is the Employment Standards Act may say one thing and you're like, great, I'm compliant. But if the case law decision is slightly different, or there's been a decision at the tribunal, those are the things that also go into best practices. Is everybody still good? We're still following along. So I'll give you an example. And this is important for, I think, every employer. I always recommend having an employment agreement. And an employment agreement isn't just, you work for me and here's your start date and here's your wage. You need to have a termination clause. I recommend a probation clause, and I also recommend a progressive discipline clause. Anyways, so since I think it happened in June 2021, there was a very significant court decision about the nature of termination clauses and employment agreements, and it sent all employers scrambling. So basically, in a termination clause, you usually have, here's what happens if you're terminated without cause. Without cause means without cause at law or under the Employment Standards Act. It wasn't a fit, you've had to downsize, whatever it is, that's without cause. Then there's usually another paragraph that says with cause, which is you've done something, the employee's done something illegal, it was a serious health and safety infraction, or it was a performance issue. You usually don't say that with cause, but something very serious, right? Without cause, you receive your entitlements under Employment Standards Act. With cause, you do not receive those entitlements. So that's the basics. So what the decision was is that in this case, the with cause portion was shown not to be legal. And in the past, they would have separated that paragraph out from the entire agreement. In this decision, they said, no, it makes the entire employment termination clause invalid. And then the person who was terminated received a large settlement. So now there's also been additional case law, because then there's an appeal. So basically over this, it's been upheld, and the language in the terminated with cause has to be very specific, refer back to the Employment Standards Act to ensure that you're compliant. So that's just, an example, maybe a complex example, but how the legislation can say one thing, but the court said something else. And so now as an employer, we just need to ensure everything's up to date. Is everybody good? Any questions, confusion, or stop talking?
I was gonna ask a question, Carey, if that's okay.
Sure.
So
Just
you're
let me
just
ask,
saying,
just Jade, can I ask here, Carrie, do you want to go through the discussion questions? Because you've got the first one on the screen, and do you want to have questions
Yeah.
after, or how do you want this set up?
So I think if Jade asks her question, and then we'll kind of tie up my example and then go to the discussion
Okay, sure.
question.
Okay, does the question relate to that example, Jade? Sorry.
just about more of a clarifying question, just about what Carey was saying. So when you're talking about kind of best practices, you're trying to align all of those entities and making sure that if you do make a choice to, let's say, terminate somebody, that you're really following the guidance of both the tribunal and I forget what the other one was, forgive me.
Just the courts of law. But
Okay.
you're exactly right, Jade, because you have to consider the context when you're making decisions that are serious, like a potential termination or an accommodation issue or a sick leave, those kinds of things. And considering that bigger picture, yes, and making sure it's aligned in terms of a best practice.
Love it. Thanks, Jade. So why don't we address these discussion questions that have come in, Carrie, and then we'll hold the other questions, because I know you have slides and other information. So we'll just kind of move through the slides to start, and then everyone can just make some notes, and feel free to use the Zoom chat as well if you'd like.
Absolutely. So thank you. I'm kind of a talk off the top of my head kind of person. So this is one of the questions that came in. As a small business owner with 10 independent contractors, what essential policies should I have in place? And what policies and procedures are needed to be in place to stay compliant? So it's a two-part question. And in answering this question, I don't know the business owner, and I don't believe that they could be here today. But the first thing is it actually an independent contractor or is it an employee? So those of us that have a background in HR, it's a legal test. It's called CHRL legal test. And you need to ask yourself these questions, because if someone is actually considered an employee, you could be liable for paying them as an employee. So recent court case in British Columbia, there was an employee who was working as a contractor for 19 to 20 years remotely, invoiced the company weekly, bi-weekly for these 20 years. The employment relationship ended and they were successful in saying that it was a dismissal and that they were an employee. So they are going to be owed damages. And I'm giving examples not to frighten you, because it can be overwhelming, but just have an idea why that's important. So for someone to be considered an independent contractor, they need to have control over their own work, how, when, and where they do it, right? The second thing is they need to provide their own tools. So whether that's a laptop, software, or an actual physical tool, in construction, they need to provide their own tools. And then there's the question of, are they integrated with your business's operations? So are they there day to day? Are they seen as a spokesperson, or are they ancillary to it? And it's clear that even though they're representing your brand, they're not integrated with the day to day. And then specific results. So is this person hired for a specific project to deliver something, or is it continuing ongoing work? Now, there's always gray areas. So for myself, right now, I am fractional with an employer as their interim director of HR. I'm there daily, but it's clear that there's a start date and end date. Some of the work is ongoing, but then I have projects. So there's always gray areas, but that's the first thing to ask yourself. If they're an employee, then we would look at having an employment agreement, making sure you're protecting yourself. If they're an independent contractor, what I would say that I recommend is The same way that you'd have a contract for services with your clients, you need to have a subcontractor agreement. It's a contract for services or a subcontractor agreement that has things like code of conduct in it, what's expected, any client service standards, privacy, ownership of data, intellectual property. Carrie's nodding her head a lot, so perhaps you've had this with other seminars, but you want to make sure that you do that with your independent contractor. And then myself, for my insurance, I have purchased subcontractor insurance, right? So as a business owner now, my business may be different than yours because I also have to have errors and omissions as an HR practitioner, but I was very specific that I wanted subcontractor protection. Just in case I brought someone in on a project. So for that, for the independent contractor, having as much as you can within that contract for services is my recommendation. And then in terms of standards, so I've had a real estate client and they don't have employees. Everyone except for the administrator is an independent contractor. They all have their own incorporated businesses. However, they have still had workplace conflict. And they have still had to deal with behavior that is disruptive and in some cases violent, right? So in those cases, I would say you should have a business code of conduct, which outlines things like integrity, transparency, and respect in the workplace. That perhaps you have a client service standard. So if you have a subcontractor who is not responding in the length of time that you've indicated is reasonable or is missing deadlines, those kinds of things, then you have another way to end the relationship if needed. Privacy, the use of information, I said that before, intellectual property. And then depending upon your business, you may also look at, especially if it's creative or consulting, what's your use of AI policy? Right? Because that goes back to the privacy and protection of privacy, as well as if your value and brand is you're going to disclose when something's been made with the use of AI, I would consider thinking about those things so that you wouldn't have like a huge cumbersome manual, but you would have those standards available. And that would, that makes you compliant internally. Even if someone's an independent contractor, the standards outlined in the Ontario Human Rights Code always apply. So you may want to have a little bit longer of a respect in the workplace and defining some of the things like harassment and discrimination for those people, and that it will not be tolerated. It will not be tolerated from clients or to clients. It's a little bit different than the employment relationship, but when you make those things clear, then everybody understands where they're working from.
And it's interesting when you're saying that, because a lot of our weekend clients are themselves independent contractors. So, and probably some on the call. So kind of works both ways, whether you're hiring or you have been hired. It's good to know that, you can have an agreement. I'm assuming you could request an agreement, maybe. And most people sign a contract. That's why the word is in there. But anyways, just noticing, that works both ways.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be, again, the point is not to increase the administrative burden. The point is to create something that you can use in different ways as a risk mitigation strategy. What I do not like about the field of HR, I hate paperwork. I loathe it. I do. I loathe it. But once you've created it to even add into your contract, here are my values. Here is my statement of my personal code of conduct and integrity and what I'm going to deliver to you. And I'm expecting the same in return, right? Like subcontractors and trades, it's like a health and safety thing. So my general contractor, we would give the subcontractor a 2-pager on what's the work you're doing, what are the precautions you're taking, and we all agree that this is how it's going to go forward. The same type of thing. And it doesn't hurt anything. It might add a page, but once you've got it, then you can move forward with it.
Right. Does anyone have a follow-up question to this one before we move on? Just want to make sure. Yeah, go ahead, Jade.
Sorry, I like to ask a lot of questions. I'm just thinking about this, and I'm going to give you a tiny little bit of context of something that I actually have to do like within this week. Is I'm being, I guess, contracted, I would say then, to run an annual general meeting for a very large company. And so when I send them kind of our like contract, written agreement, however you'd like to refer to it. So code of conduct is that piece that I should include, basically how I'm going to treat you and expect to be treated. Are there other specifics? Because based on what you had said here, I'm definitely like a contractor per se for that one weekend to get a specific result. It's a project, that's it. I'm using my own tools, my own everything else. So I'm being contracted to do that. In terms of are there any other valuable pieces that I should be thinking about to put into that written agreement or contract?
I don't think so. And I think honestly, Jade, for the one-off event and an AGM, unless it's a situation, and I've been in these where the AGM might be controversial, usually they're not, but I've been to a few where people get a little bit upset. I think if you want to include, here are my values, here are how I run a meeting, and here is how I mediate. Here's how I accept questions. Here is how I redirect. Are you okay with that approach? Right? Because so I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it. And I think after you do the AGM, you might have reflections on, oh, wow, my style is I say, thank you. I'm going to cut you off there. And I'm going to go to this question. Whereas that organization may have never cut anybody off in their 50 years in existence. And that's where the conflict for you can happen. Right. So, I obviously advocate to being transparent about what you're doing, but as you do more of those, then you may have learnings from that where you can tell the person what to expect in your services while you're leading that AGM and moderating conversation.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That makes sense. Stacy, I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, I had essentially the same, I have so many questions, Carey, but I had essentially the same main question as Jade about that, but just to see if I can remember one of my other questions about, I guess I have two. So for that last part where you talked about mediation, asking questions, for me, typically that would be just a conversation, not necessarily ensconced in a contract. Are you suggesting that it's putting into the contract, or?
Not all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And so everybody's different. And again, the point is not to have an administrative burden. And I'm learning as I go with my business as well. Do you know what I mean? So I think a conversation is fine where you're clear with, this is my approach, and this is how I approach the mediation or the moderations. And if you get feedback from the client that that's not what they were expecting, or there's some disagreement or discord, then at that point you might think, oh, maybe I do need a half a page explaining my process of moderation so that everybody is clear. Yeah. Right. And so, this piece is a culture, integrity, values piece. It can be risk mitigation to make sure that your values are aligning with clients that you're accepting. So that's one of the things that I've, although most days I'm scared, out of my mind about what am I doing, but at the same time, I have the control to accept or decline based on my values. And so that overcomes my fear. So I think in this context, as you learn, that's when it comes in. And the risk mitigation part is just for you as the business owner, making sure you're not spending time on clients that don't fit. And for your reputation, ensuring that people are really clear on how you will deliver the service.
Thanks, Carey. So I do have a follow-up, if that's okay, but I don't want to take away from somebody else. I can't see.
Go ahead, Stacy.
Okay. So there's two separate questions in my head, but I'll start with this one, Carey, and it's slightly off of the contract. So it's around the independent contractor discussion. So volunteering for a nonprofit, teeny tiny group. And they have a situation where they have longstanding folks that are doing independent contracting work. Suspicion is maybe they are not independent contractors, but actual employees of this teeny tiny organization. We've always looked at it from the risk associated with charitable status, CRA, that type of thing. You started to talk about the potential risks from the human resource perspective and being potentially liable for saying like a dismissal and owed, or some other benefit type payments. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what are the other potential risks from the HRE perspective that
Yeah.
would be associated with misclassifying those individuals?
Absolutely. So the first thing is that the organization would be liable for payroll taxes. CPP, which is currently 5.95, I think, percent. EI, employment insurance, which is 2.3% of gross. That's the employer contribution for that. As a small organization, you're probably exempt from the employer health tax, but the CPP and EI, you potentially would be liable for the payment of those to the CRA for the entire time the person was an employee, right? So those can be big. It's not insignificant. And then you would have to produce documents about what you had paid to that person. So normally independent contractors, businesses are required to do T4A, which is a statement of income to anyone that you contract. Those may or may not have been done, but then it becomes a battle of the records. So does the organization have the better records, or does the independent contractor have the better records? Whoever has the better records is the winner, basically. And then potentially, yeah, you would be on the line for pay in lieu of notice. So pay in lieu of notice under the Employment Standards Act is you either get paid or you get notice that the employment relationship is ending. That's why we have an employment agreement, because it limits it. It limits it to the ESA maximum, which is 8 weeks, or some variation of that depending upon the organization. If you do not have a termination clause, common law, so the courts, it's 1 month minimum per year of service, right? And that's what you would be liable for. If you have a payroll that's $2 million or above, then you also have to provide severance, which severance is generally 1 week per year of service, in addition to the pay in lieu of notice. So when small organizations like, oh, we're not worried, this and that, you're protecting against the risk, you're mitigating the risk. And if that means hiring an HR person for 5 hours to make sure that your employment agreements are in place, or to show you the risk, that's worth the investment, because it could be thousands and thousands of dollars in the future, right? So those are the risks of misclassifying someone. The other one is someone gets injured on the job. Now, as a small organization, not-for-profits and charities do not have to be members of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board insurance plan. Depending upon their operations, I usually encourage them to think about it. But once you join that plan, you cannot get out of it. So it has to be an educated choice, because it's almost impossible to get it. It's like getting out of OMERS. It's almost impossible. OMERS is the Ontario Municipal Employee Retirement Fund. Anyways, it's almost impossible to get out of it. So you have to realize that this will be an added cost to operations. But if employees are working in warehouses or out gardening, so I was on the board at Living Spoonful, we bought WSIB because we knew the employees were in potentially dangerous environments. So if somebody's injured at work or in the course of work, WSB is the only income replacement program. The other ones through private insurance are usually cost prohibitive. So if someone gets injured, then they can't collect EI for sick benefits because they're not an employee, right? So then there's the added of someone then suing to get income replacement, right? So there's, again, all of these are worst case scenarios. So not everybody's like, oh, don't bring Carey back. But these are important things to know. And sometimes people, the small organizations don't have the knowledge, or it hasn't been explained to them in such a way that they're like, oh, mind blown, this could be something we need to think about.
Does that help, Stacy?
That's awesome, and we're gonna talk after the call.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's move on to another one, and then that might also bubble up some other questions as well.
Okay, so this is from someone. Are there some strategies for establishing one's role as a team lead when you're not only new to the team, but when the other members previously have not had a lead? So this has been a very rocky start, and people are resistant to change. And that's difficult. And I've been there, and it's difficult for many, many reasons. So again, my approach is we have to start with why. So why is there pushback? Why is there resistance? So is there resistance because no one's ever been managed and held accountable, right? And holding people accountable can mean different things to different people. In my mind, it means I'm checking on your work. Can I support you in your work? Are you achieving the goals we've established? But if that has never been communicated and they've been left on their own, is the resistance because they've been left on their own for so long that they're just irritated by the thought of anyone asking them what they're doing? You know, they could be isolated, could be a lot of things. Have they worked there? So I'm working with one organization now that staff have been there between 20 and 39 years. So they have potentially been doing the same thing for 20 to 39 years. And you're going to come in and tell me what to do? Or another one that's quite common, the job was posted, other members applied, some of them were not successful, right? That's very common. So first, I would say in this situation, try to find out the why. What is the why for the resistance? If there are someone who wasn't successful, then you'll need to find out, did the employer or did anyone on the leadership team sit with them and give them feedback in a constructive way? How is the new leader introduced? Those are very, very key to change management. Then you'd find that out. And then it's time and trust. So how are you building trust as a leader? So first, I would establish communication channels and expectations. So, you know, here is the job that I've been given, and all of you are the experts because you're frontline, so you're going to help me do it. But here's how I would like us to communicate. And if you need a different way of communication, you need to let me know. Is it verbal followed by written? Is it written followed by verbal? How often do you follow up? Is it messenger? Is it text? Is it, you record a voicemail on WhatsApp? How do they want to be communicated with? Establish them and then follow them. You have to be consistent in following it after you've established it. Once you establish communication, then step 2 is, what are the goals or expectations for behavior or performance, and what are those timelines? And make it very clear to everyone and they understand their role in it, and make sure it's clear, because you can't say one thing one week. So the thing that causes conflict in the workplace is lack of direction, lack of clear direction, because it's unclear to the person, changing direction without notice, lack of autonomy, right? Those are going to be all of the things that are going to cause that conflict. And then the hardest one is you have to address conflict as it arises, even gossip. You cannot ignore it. Ignoring conflict makes it worse. Ignoring gossip makes it worse. And gossip is just the lack of information, and people are filling the holes with whatever they feel, right? So it's addressing that conflict, which is difficult to do. In the resources, I have a couple of resource slides. One that I found very helpful, it's called Crucial Conversations. It's a book, it's been published for quite some time. There's a website, there's probably a podcast, but it takes you through, there's different strategies on how to have that conflict. But my biggest thing is don't ignore the gossip, because gossip it's a symptom and it's your first indication that something is wrong. So you have to address it in a respectful way. And that doesn't mean saying, hey, I heard you told so-and-so, so-and-so. It's, I need to speak with you. This is what I've heard and through the grapevine, and repeat it, even if it's nasty. Just say, this is what I've heard. Can we talk about it? Not easy, but like that's the hard work of doing that, and also addressing problematic behaviors. So if you ask someone, we've had a conversation and now this is your third conversation, now you need to start progressive coaching discipline, because if you do not address the problematic behavior, it sends a message to everyone else in the team that you're not serious, right? So I don't think any of this is groundbreaking to any of you, but it's very, very difficult to do. And it's difficult to do if you're already in a change environment and you've got pressures from multiple areas. So it's making the time to do it and ensuring that you're building that time into your work plan and how you're managing the expectations of others if you have deliverables.
And when you mention that progressive, I mean, if you have that in the contract, because you referred to that earlier, this is going to be the way that we'll deal with it, then people aren't shocked when it happens. Like you can actually say, well, if you remember, I did say that this is how we would deal with it. And so it's not drama, it's you're just following a procedure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, I love it. Anyone have a follow-up question to this one? I think we'll move on, but and by the way, if anyone has a question, but you don't want to like come off mic or be identified that it's your question, just private message it to me and I will say someone is asking this. And then for the recording purposes or for the group itself, we don't have to say who's asking. Stacy, go ahead. Stacy Rock, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not a question, Carey, so much as just a comment. You mentioned crucial conversations. I love crucial conversations. I'm a crucial conversations trainer for 2 organizations in town. I put the link here. They've got a lot of free resources on the website. There is a paid public course because their business model is that you have to certify an internal trainer to actually give it unless you do a public course. But if people are interested in this topic, signing up even for their newsletter is fantastic. They kind of drip the model, and it is very much about like noticing the facts, and you're stating, I noticed that you, and then you share your interpretation of it, and then you ask for them. It is more of a coaching conversation. They also have another product called Crucial Accountability. I think they've maybe rejigged the title on that, but that is more around the performance management side of things. So they use very similar to what you just talked about, is looking at like why people are resisting, trying to look at influencing factors as well as the tools that they expose in crucial conversations. So Crucial Accountability, or whatever they've retooled it as, is another really great resource.
Great, thanks for that, Stacy. There's a question I'll just ask from the private message, Carey. So the question is around team bonding. So the question is, what are some activities we can do to get closer as a team? Some of the teams are lacking teamwork, and they're encountering such diversity, language barrier, generation gap. Some individuals are feeling isolated. So do you have any suggestions? I'm not sure if this is a remote team, so maybe that person can let me know if it's in person or a remote team, because I'm assuming that team bonding would be a little bit different if you are all remote versus if you're all in the same workspace.
Yeah, so it can be tough, especially in very diverse teams. So it takes a lot of thought as a leader. So I don't know if I have any activities off the top of my head, but again, it comes back to the questions. What are the cultural differences between the people in your team, right? And is English a second language for some of those team members, right? So those are things that I've come across in my work, because sometimes the way that someone will express themselves if English is not their first language is much more direct than people raised in Canada prefer. And that causes many conflicts and misunderstandings, because it's much more direct than someone like myself would expect, or I guess tolerate in some ways, or it can be jarring. And then to really think through an activity for a diverse group and ensuring that it is inclusive. So it's things that we take for granted, but that just need some thought. Alcohol, alcohol is not part of every culture, and some people do not imbibe, period. It's changing now, drinking culture. There are some cultures that very much drink is part of everything, but if alcohol is going to be part of it, how do you ensure that someone doesn't feel singled out, right? Physical activities, right? Some people may not want to put on sports clothes. It may feel embarrassing or whatever. Some people may have mobility issues that they don't feel like sharing with anyone else, and whatever it is. So you just think through, okay, so physical activities, because usually we'll go to, let's have a trust exercise and everybody fall backwards, or let's go for drinks, or let's go and do the mud run. And I'm not saying that you can't, but think about what that means. Food is often part, and it brings people together. Food is a wonderful thing to either make a meal together or share a meal together where you can have some talking. There could be different, like I know in Kingston, there's a few organizations that could set that up for you and different things you could do, but ask ahead of time, what are people's preferences, limitations, allergies, right? But cooking and preparing a meal together can be a good thing. And if people are comfortable, you could also ask them to talk about the dish that they're preparing so that it opens things up in a way, for diverse things. So there's not a good answer for that. I think in person and meaningful is good. Or if you are encouraging everyone at work to learn something like respect in the workplace or client service standards or whatever it is, and maybe there's a business book that you've asked people to read and you can all discuss it together. So I would say that the first ones together, keep it at a professional level so that people feel comfortable, engaged until moving to the maybe more social aspects or whatever. But it can be tough. And it's no different than a business meeting, because often there are people who will not shut up in the meeting. And then you have other people who they don't process information the same way and they need time to process. So it's just thinking through, and it's not going to be perfect, but thinking through what is going to make people feel included.
I think that's a really great point. But I'm imagining a questionnaire even before you were to plan an activity. Say, hey, I'm planning to do some things. Here's a questionnaire, just so you go in with your eyes wide open, because we don't always know or can assume about any particular culture that they don't eat meat, for instance, or the alcohol, as you mentioned. But yeah, those are some great points. So I hope that answers the question that was in the Zoom chat. Do you have another one, Carey, that you wanted to address? I know it's from a slightly different perspective, but I'll let you decide.
Yeah, so another question that we had come in was about kind of invisible disabilities and the reaction of employers when it comes to minor or non-visible, and how organizations generally approach this, and how could we navigate disclosure. So this is a good question, both from an employer side as well as from a candidate side. So under the Ontario Human Rights Code, you cannot be discriminated against in employment, housing, and education, for all of the protected grounds. But how do you navigate that, right? How do you navigate that as an employer? I think being accessible, so ensuring that if you are recruiting, that process is accessible or open to being accessible. So you're a small business, you may not get a request for accommodations during recruitment, but what would you do if you did? And how would you accommodate what that looks like? Because as we know, there's lots of hidden disabilities or differences. And in my practice in HR, so how do organizations approach this? I approach it as I'm open, and I don't expect anyone to disclose anything unless it's directly related to the position, right? So in a manufacturing environment, I had someone apply who was hearing impaired, and we can accommodate during the interview, but I had to have a very frank discussion, because at that point in plant, we are still under construction. We did not have visual safety cues. We did not have other visual reminders of safety. So at that point, I could not accommodate that person in the workplace. So I did not accommodate them in the interview process for that reason, right? So, and in the workplace, unless it's something like that, how do you disclose, or how would you want the employee to disclose to you? And I think that the best policy is transparency, but may feel uncomfortable for a business owner to ask questions or to have that transparent conversation when you're afraid of risk or don't know how to handle it in the moment. So I would say that normally the applicant wouldn't disclose until after they've accepted the agreement. And then when they disclose, just have a frank discussion and say, okay, how does this impact your workflow and what type of supports do you think you require? Right? And then you make a decision based on that. So I've had, I mean, there's different people, and there's also, it may not be an existing, or it may not be a constant, but it could be someone who's already an employee is going through a lot of family trauma, and so their anxiety is high. So how do you accommodate that? So these are difficult conversations. I would say that if you're a solo business owner or you don't know, that you engage, with an HR person to coach you through it, to see how you'd like to handle it or what the options are. So in employment standards and under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and human rights, the employer must accommodate to the point of undue hardship. Undue hardship is a high bar, but it normally means that it would be so cost prohibitive to comply with the person's accommodations that the business cannot handle it, or the person cannot do most of the job because of the requested accommodations.
So Carey,
Right.
there's a question asked in the Zoom chat, which makes a lot of sense regarding this. When they were hired, they didn't disclose that they had this medical issue, let's say, that prevents them from doing the job, really. So, is the employer required to provide those supports if it wasn't disclosed at hiring?
So if whatever exists precludes them from doing the job, then you would go through the process of withdrawing the offer, right? But it has to be very specific and meet tests. So in the job description and in the job posting, is it very clear that this requirement is a core, like a bona fide job requirement, is a core requirement, part of the job, and there is no way to accommodate it. And then during the process, if they did not disclose until after, and in fact that doesn't match up, then that can be a withdrawal of contract for, in the law they would say dishonesty or whatever, but it's not likely. Like, I don't know, maybe someone's experienced this and there've been some court cases, but it's very unlikely. So I had different situations in my career, where someone had a criminal record, and we were very specific about, we're okay with a criminal record, but it cannot relate to these things. Then after the offer's been accepted, very shortly, we found out, oh, that was not the case. And so we had to withdraw the offer. That very seldom happens. But like, if your position is, I'll just use my manufacturing, shifts are 12 hours
I can help
long.
you with this.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So,
it was Linda's question.
Okay.
Yes. Oh yeah. I'm all over this question. It happens way too often here. So I own a sewing shop. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who think they can sew. And we give a lot of leeway. But part of the hiring process is that we actually have them do something, because it's really important that they have the skills. So they might get through that 15, 20-minute portion, And then we hire them. And then the next thing we know is they can't see. They can't thread a needle. And, so they're walking around asking someone else to thread the needle for them. Well, we change needles and thread 100 times a day. We can't be doing that. And it's little stuff like that that you can't always catch or ask. Or, then they come to work and say, oh, I get frequent migraines. So they're constantly calling in sick. Like, it's just all these things that, and I think part of it is with our business, we are extremely busy. People do not realize how busy our shop is. And I'm very upfront when I hire them, but they just don't believe me because, we're just an alterations and repair shop. And, so they can't stand for long. Oh, I have to sit. Or like, there's all these little stupid things that it just drives you crazy, because how can you sew if A, you've got arthritis in your hands, or you can't see to thread a needle, and we can't always catch those little things. So after they've been hired and after a couple of weeks, we're like, what's going on here? And then by then, everything's a pain in the butt.
But that's not like those aren't necessarily disabilities or protected grounds, is
okay.
Right. So those things could be, they could be training issues, they could be changing the recruitment process issues, they could be scheduling issues, there could be other things to try to mitigate that. So if they do a sewing sample, that's great, but then, potentially, is it worth your time to pay for them to come in for a 4.5-hour test shift? You have to pay them legally. But if doing that is going to save you time, energy, and, coaching later on, that you might think about putting that in that recruitment process, and to pick a busy day, right? To be like, okay, we're going to set you up and this is a typical day, and have them work 4.5 hours. And then you can both decide, right? So, and also, it's frustrating, but it's hard because you can't say to someone in an interview or expect them to disclose if they have arthritis, or, sometimes I can't see to thread a needle, so I wouldn't apply for that job. So I think they do, and people do things, but I guess it's a difficult one to pull apart, Linda, but I maybe it requires, and I'm sure that you've tried lots of different things over the course of your business.
Going forward, what we do is we do the interview, they're here for an hour. They do, we test them on the machines and little things. And then if I think they're competent, then I will hire them specifically only for 1 week to see if they work out. But you still can't catch a lot of the stuff that goes on afterwards. You're like, are you kidding me?
Carey, when you mentioned the job the job description, like, and so sorry if you just said this, sorry, I missed that. But if it's very clear in the job description that this is the level of skill required, like, is that you're out? Like, if someone doesn't have that level of skill and you discover they don't, do you have an out? Or, like, I guess this applies to any business or any industry.
And it's a gray zone, and it depends on the level. The answer is it depends, but that's why there is a 90-day, 3-month probationary period, during which time you can end the employment relationship for lack of fit. Now, keep in mind, in the past, it used to be you could end the employment relations for any reason without notice or pay in lieu of notice. The Employment Standards Act language has changed, so probationary period clauses have changed, and it has to be for lack of fit. That's still very broad, but you just want to make sure you're using the same language that's in the Employment Standards Act. So that's why that is there. And, some of it can be you are hiring the best of a bad group because the labor ebbs and flows, right? So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's like what Linda's doing, which is adjusting her, interviewing and onboarding process to test And it's just never going to be perfect. And it's probably always going to be, for small business owners with frontline staff, it's going to be a friction point. So it's more about putting in processes to minimize the friction and recognizing your tolerance level, and being very clear, because I've done high volume recruiting. People do not read. We all know, and so it can become really frustrating. So some of the approaches that Linda are taking are, some are working, some are not, but she's doing what I would suggest. And you just have to keep testing. I'm not sure that I have a great answer.
Well, actually, I can give you two specific examples. One is I hired someone and her skills were okay and everything, but her standards were terrible. So I kept saying to her that we're going to give you some training. We're going to give you some dedicated training, while you're here and everything. And she just kept refusing. Oh, I don't need training. I don't need training. But she really did. And then finally I just said, I'm sorry, you can't, we don't need you, because she just would not accept the training. And the other one is, how much leeway do we have with personalities? Because our team is really great. We get along great, we chat and everything else. But sometimes when we try and bring somebody else in, their personalities tend to be so aggressive or different that it causes a lot of conflict. Is that a grounds within the 90 days for lack of fit?
Yep. Lack of it could be anything, as long as it's not discriminatory.
Right.
Right.
Okay. But is the personality thing discriminatory?
Personality? No. Cultural basis, religious basis, ethnic background, cultural practices. There's a lot that can go into someone's personality.
Yeah.
So you just need to be aware of those things. But, culture fit can also mean fit with the team. But I would challenge you to also think about, if you're bringing in someone new to a team that works well together and has unspoken rules, unspoken rituals, unspoken ways of communicating, what are you doing and what can you do to make that a better inclusionary process? I'm not saying it's going to work every time, but we as leaders have that responsibility to understand that when people have worked together, I've worked with people that have been my supervisors, that we've finished each other's sentences, right? We've all experienced different things. So if you're bringing in someone who's new, there's a responsibility to make them feel included, to try to verbalize or make present what those unwritten rules are.
Okay. Ours tend to, because we're in the manufacturing, it's always a cultural, like everyone here has a different culture, everyone has a different religion, and we're all cognitive of that. But really, it's bringing in the Canadian people that just cannot adjust to all the different diversity that we have here.
But that's about creating a safe and open environment where that person can ask questions. Because often people are afraid to even ask the question. They don't want to be
super open here, super open. That's
you might think that.
Staff thinks so too.
Yeah. No, but what about the new person?
Does the new person everything? Okay. Everything. It's a lot of people just cannot handle all the different cultures and all the different religions, I guess. I don't know.
Potentially.
Okay. Yeah. I don't want to waste. Thanks.
It's a good one to follow up on. I'm just seeing this might be actually a good conversation. If there's a strategy or a plan that Carey and you, Linda, could work together on, that's something to think about as well. Yeah. I'm sure that these things that are coming up are other people like, oh gosh, I've seen that, or I've been a part of that. So yeah.
Well, I've also brought in language interpreters to make sure that everybody is understanding the different languages, so that it's translated to them in their language so that we're all clear. I don't know.
It's complex. It's extremely complex. Yeah.
If
Okay,
it was
thank you.
easy, Carey would be out of a job.
Yeah, that is true. I don't know if
Did
we
you have
more
another one that
questions.
was all requested? I forget if there was another one. Did you choose one of the other ones that was submitted?
I think I did have one, and I
Okay.
didn't put it
No
on the
worries. We can go
slide.
through the common ones. And then if anyone else has one, Linda, that was such a great question because it, like I said, is on other people's minds as well. Go ahead and put those in the Zoom chat. We'll let Carey get to some of the common ones she gets asked because these might cover some that are on your minds.
Okay.
Again, you can submit privately if you'd like to, but Carey, go ahead and anyone can message me in the Zoom chat.
Yeah. So, and if these don't apply, so the first one, can I hire a family member or can I hire a relative of an existing employee? Sometimes people, it's like, yes, you can, but you need to understand the risk in doing so, right? So like any other employee with a family member, I would have an employment agreement. And then you're gonna, if you have to have a performance discussion, then you have to realize that you have to have that with your family member, right? So yes, you can. I think there can be a lot of emotion involved in that, but you just have to be aware of it. And hiring a relative of an existing employee. So in past, earlier in my career, oh, I'm sorry, did someone?
Oh, sorry.
Earlier in my career, I would say just don't do it. But labor markets are tight, skill sets are tight. In Kingston, you'll often have someone coming here and the trailing spouse, right? So that's always so. So what I recommend with hiring a relative is obviously they should not report to one another, and preferably be in different departments or in different types of roles if possible. The one thing that can happen when you hire a family member or you hire a relative of an existing employee is you need to be very clear in your processes and expectations such that you don't run into a family status discrimination issue, right? And that could happen where maybe you have spouses that work in different departments and they have an ailing parent or they have an ailing child. And so both of them want to be off all of the time. And then you look at it as an attendance issue, but then it becomes a family discrimination issue because they're off because of family reasons, right? Like that, it can be complex and it's not ideal. So, and one employer, we had a husband and wife worked, they were on different crews. I had to fire the husband and did not know the day I fired him was their anniversary. I do not want to be in that position again, but that's just an example of life. So if anybody has anything specific about that, but you just have to be aware of family status. So childcare, elder care, caring for household members that could sometimes impact in the employment relationship. Performance or attendance issues. Attendance can be a big thing, especially with customer facing positions like cafes, restaurants, retail. So performance we've talked about a little bit. So I think having the critical conversations coaching correction model, right? So, or the progressive discipline should always begin with training and then coaching and correction, and then progress into documented conversations if needed. And I would say that you address them head on in a respectful manner. Attendance issues, anyone who has attendance issues, I would recommend you have an attendance policy and you're very clear about that attendance policy in terms of what's expected and being on time and in your workstation, very, very clear. How you report if you're not going to be on time, how do you report absences, whether it's sick or family, and just make sure that you have that very clear. And then addressing the issues as they happen, because if you have a policy but you never use it, then you may as well not have a policy. And in the law, they'll take it that you don't have a policy because you haven't been consistent in applying it.
Carrie, can I just slide in a question there? Because there might be someone who's just like, oh my gosh, I don't have an attendance policy. So let's say they implemented one next week. Obviously and they currently have an employee with an attendance issue. Obviously it would be as of that moment, like, but you have the freedom to introduce policies whenever you want, I'm assuming. So it would be as of that moment, then it would be like, if it's like 3 strikes, you're out, or sort of, it started as of that moment of the policy. Obviously you can't go back. I'm just like,
Well, you can. So what I would say is often as a business owner, you'll realize you need a policy because there's a problem, right? Whereas ideally, it's better to have like your group of policies, but you could have, you realize it because you have a problem. I still say have that difficult conversation. You sit down with the person and you say, I have noticed a pattern. And the first conversation I don't approach as punitive, but what is happening? Sometimes you'll find out things you didn't know. Their car broke down. They don't have the money to fix it. They're taking transportation, right? They've had an unexpected childcare issue, and not every person, and also depending upon cultural background, is going to be comfortable bringing personal issues to you. So the first conversation is, I've noticed a pattern. Tell me what's going on. How can I support? And then it's, here is my expectation. Right? And then from that expectation, draft the attendance policy, and then you give that to all staff and say, we're going to start with this attendance policy, and give them some notice of when it's happening. If you're a brand new company, you can do whatever, but also some people will internalize that, oh, the policy is because of me, because I was 2 minutes late one day. So you need to give people time to absorb and say, as a business, I'm growing, I'm evolving. I've noticed that this is a gap. Here is the new policy and procedure. I'm going to give you time to think about it. And in 2 weeks' time, that's when it's coming into effect. If you have business for many years and people that have been working there for 20 years and have never been held accountable, then you're going to give them more time. You're going to give them like 4 weeks or 6 weeks, right? Because this is a change management, and you can't just be like, it's a problem. Fix it, because that often doesn't fix the problem.
Interesting.
So that would be my approach to it. One thing that people do in supervisory or business ownership roles is they're like, well, I'm not going to talk to Joe. Joe's the problem, but I'm not going to talk to them. I'm just going to tell everybody, here's the new rule. Well, you know what? That accomplishes nothing, because you haven't actually addressed the problem. And it may not be a problem, but it could be something you're not aware of. The employee's just too embarrassed or whatever to tell you about it.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you, Carrie. I want to address a question in the chat, a private question, and then Jade will go to you. I'm aware we have 20 minutes left, Carrie, so we probably won't get to all the slides, but we want to give priority to the people that are here asking questions. So I just want to go to the question here. Is about 360-degree performance appraisals. How do you approach staff and make them comfortable in order to hear the feedback? Most of them want to share, frankly, about issues with their colleagues. So it feels like it's gossiping, even though we explain to them that we're conducting these 360-degree things for training and development purposes, especially with remote employees. This can be challenging. Yeah, so some staff have a growth mindset, so it's not a problem, but others are fearful. So yeah, maybe you just want to address that 360-degree. Maybe for those, some don't know what a 360-degree process is.
Right.
You also want to just capsulate it very quickly, and then we'll move on to Jade.
Sure. So 360-degree means that whoever is receiving the feedback, that you're getting feedback from their supervisors, their direct reports, peers, and potentially other partners that they're working with, right? So if you're in a not-for-profit and you have outside funders and partners, that's who you would get it to. Sometimes it can be cost prohibitive. And people will not engage unless they feel that it's 100% anonymous and cannot be traced back to them. That's just human nature, unless you're working in and have established an extremely high trust, psychologically safe workplace where this is part of everyday conversations. which is very few workplaces. It's the ideal, but unless you've established that, it has to be 100% anonymous. And then the other piece is who is going to deliver the feedback and how will they receive it? And again, it goes back to understanding the staff and understanding learning styles, preferences for communications, and when is the best time, right? Someone might be just like, give it to me right now, I just need it. And another person will be like, if you give that to me right now, I will 100% shut down and not talk to you for 3 days. This is people. So getting people engaged, you need an anonymous process. And then if this is a new process, I would suggest going with a service provider where then the person in question would get a standard report from that provider. So it would go to the person and perhaps their direct supervisor, and then they would coordinate, schedule a time, a quiet time to discuss together. So it doesn't go out to the group. There's a local company, Cynthia and Patrick Agmano, who are developing like a 360-degree AI for small and medium businesses to allow more businesses to have access to that. They're in the promo stage of it, but something like that could be affordable, anonymous, and then the people are getting those standardized feedback, and then whoever the manager is or the leader, because I've seen this happen, they have to be trained first because those cannot be weaponized. And I've seen them be weaponized and it doesn't. And by weaponized, I mean, then it becomes a performance discussion rather than a growth and coaching discussion. I don't know if that answers or is helpful.
To me, it sounds like you need a professional in that role, that it's not just an adjunct, part of what you do as a person who started XYB's business because you loved baking, for instance. Like, you're not going to have the skill. That's what I'm hearing. Like, and it wasn't a baking person, but it's just, to me, it sounds like a high level skill set to do that type of a role. So thank you for that. We'll come back to part 2 of that question, but which I haven't asked yet. But Jade, I want to go to you and then we'll come to the other part of the person's question.
I'll be quick. Mine was just in regards to the attendance issues. I was curious, Carey, have you seen any kind of shift around the policies in place for attendance as like different generations start to enter the workforce? Have you noticed that at all? I guess the one thing that stands out to me, or that I've seen a lot of even in terms of like job applications, a lot of the time they'll say like you can have as many days off or be away as much as you'd like as long as X, Y, and Z has happened. Have you noticed anything like that? I was curious.
It depends on the role. So for front-facing roles, like when I was in manufacturing for the production workers, right, or in healthcare or nursing, any kind of shift work, retail, all of those customer facing, you need to be on time. And if you're not on time, either your coworker gets stressed out, something drop, right? So for those types of roles, not really, right? In terms of attendance management, I think in organizations that, I don't want to see progressive, but let's say self-aware, there's also awareness that life happens. And so how do we accommodate that? And how do we build that into our attendance management, call-in procedures, shift covering, all of those things. In terms of knowledge-based roles, I think there's always been a lot of freedom and flexibility, but now people are just marketing it. And that's my personal opinion. So, early in my career, when my child was a toddler, I worked in economic development. There were sick days that I would bring the little portable, DVD player, and he was in my office. We just didn't have an Instagram about it. Sorry, not, but you know what I mean? So I think my guess would be, as people my son's age and maybe a little bit older come into the workforce, and depending upon their parents' work, they might have a concept of work that's very rigid or that's very in office and time-based. And I think COVID blew all of that out of the water. And I think where possible, many organizations are just codifying the flexibility. that's been available. So perhaps I've just been really blessed in the organizations that I've worked for, but I found that each one, I worked for a small business as well. I had brought my son there. There was that built-in life happens flexibility. But I think for, maybe the next generation coming in, it's also a lived value in a way that my generation didn't think about.
Yeah. And that idea of the intergenerational, you're saying when you codify something, it almost clears up some of that confusion as well. It's like, this is the
100%.
policy. Let's be clear on what expectations are, et cetera. I love it. Okay, let me ask part 2 of this question, which was along, actually other folks might be interested. It's about AI. Wanting to know what types of AI tools can be integrated into HR functions to facilitate and speed up the processing.
I'm not an AI expert, and I'm experimenting, right? So for me, policy development, right? You have to double check it against the legislation, but there's so many different free templates available that you can use the free template, put in some non-identifying information about your core business and say, just update this for me, and then have someone review it. So job descriptions, interview questions, SWOT analysis, even I've used it for companies that are Excel based, and I've created recruitment trackers with time to hire, time to interview. It'll do all of the formulas for me. I don't have to learn how to do, like, there's so many tools to automate those things. And I think it's a whole brand new world that I am not an expert in, but I've started to incorporate into how I do my work, because they're time savers, right? And the perplexity is great. So it's like a AI kind of Google. But if you're looking at, you have a specific question. So you could go in, like this morning, I was like, what is the name of the legal test in Ontario for independent contractors versus employees? It gives me the answer, and then it gives links to the original document so you can double check it. So as a small business owner, you can do some of those checking yourself. You still may need to consult with legal or HR in more complex matters, but these are things that would take hours of my time earlier in my career to make sure that I was cross-referencing all of these different things. I think there are some interesting people locally that are doing things with AI. So informatics, I think that's Patrick and Cynthia's company. Forget people's names. Claire does training. Oh, that's terrible. Carey probably knows.
Claire Bouvier.
Yeah, Claire Bouvier
I
does
would
training.
also,
Yeah.
invest. If you're in the Kingston area, I know there's people from different parts of the world, but Invest Kingston, if you're in Kingston, also has, Carey mentioned perplexity.ai, which I put into the Zoom chat. Are there any other specific HR? I'm assuming not, because most is very general when it comes to AI.
Yeah, most are general, and there's some companies that are developing tools. I just haven't used them. I've been trying to learn how I can manipulate the tools myself right now, because I subscribe to the Chat GPT professional version. So I'm just learning a little bit of that. And there's some interesting like startups and things that I follow on LinkedIn. The main thing is the privacy piece. So I think that'll take a little while to work out, but there are also some interesting things, or like training, or and I haven't tried tools, but there's tools, one's called Scribe, where you could put in your thing and create a training workflow, or a visual for visual learners of workflow. So I think there's ways that everybody can leverage it as a tool to save that time and administrative burden.
And I think you hit a really great point. AI still is early on when it comes to legally sensitive matters, like the ones we're talking about, and privacy matters. I mean, all of us can write a blog post using ChatGPT, but if you're writing an agreement that's legally binding, you want to take a little extra care. And that's where I think we still need eyes and ears of a professional on those types of things.
Yeah.
Love it. Carey, we probably have time for one more question, maybe from your sheet. And I know you have some resources. I just want to make sure that you're able to slide those in before the end of this session.
Yeah.
What would be another hot one? Like, what's another hot one, do you think we want to?
The hot one is, how do I fire somebody? Right? Like that's always the top one. And basically, and this, it will sound terrible and maybe not aligned with my values, but you can fire anyone at any time for any reason. You just may have to pay them a lot of money. That is the end, but you have to, so that's why setting up the process as a business owner, either having your contract for service for your independence, an employment agreement for actual employees, making sure that you're updating those employment agreements with long-term employees every couple of years, all of that. And then the termination piece is basically treating someone with dignity. So there are court cases where people who have been dismissed have received damages for damages to dignity or reputation upon termination, right? So you hired this person. So, you know, another rule of thumb, hire slowly, fire quickly. But so hopefully you've done most in the hiring slowly, but when you meet with that person, you need to understand you're sitting across from another person and this is going to impact their lives and the lives of their family in a very significant way. So you would treat them as you would want to be treated and some. So I usually, if it gets to the point of termination, unless it's during a probationary period, consult with someone if it's a long one, whether that's a lawyer or an HR person, consult with them so they can give you an idea of here are the potential risks and here is what I would put in the letter, because also you need to provide it in writing and the language in the letter needs to match the Employment Standards Act. And then I make a script including where will it take place, who will be in the meeting, what will be said, do you have tissues, do you have water, do you know their emergency contact if they need a ride home, do you have a taxi chit, and how are you going to handle if someone wants to take their things that day, right? Are you going to allow them to do that, or are you going to say contact me later or come back after hours? And then you have to arrange that. So your safety, the safety of the person that is being terminated, both physical and psychological safety is top of mind, right? And to do it so that their dignity is intact, right? So I've had a few difficult terminations, but I've terminated people for violence, I've terminated people for fraud, I've terminated, unfortunately, a lot of people. Best compliment I ever had in my life is someone I terminated reached out a year or two later on LinkedIn to say, thank you for the way that you terminated me. I realize now that I was on the wrong path and this is what I'm now doing. So that's kind of my inspiration. That's how a termination should go. Now, it doesn't always go that way. So termination, like hiring, is another process that requires thought and planning. But yes, you can terminate someone.
And I'm assuming that maybe, I don't know, you have in somewhere in your manual and this is how we do it again, so that if someone's like, why did you do it that way? It's like, well, this is the policy, this is the way we would do it for anyone. Like, I don't know if that's the case. I'm not an HR person, but I imagine if you could go back and point to a manual that says, this is the flow that we have followed, just like we would have followed with anyone else.
Yeah,
so they
exactly.
don't feel singled out in that way. Okay, I would love for you just to share some of the resources that you have. Obviously, we have so many questions because this is a complex issue, and otherwise you wouldn't be here. But also, we want to make sure you get your contact information to people. Your website, I know, which has some information on it. So I'll put that in the Zoom chat while you are covering this.
Yeah, so I just had a couple of slides: terms of employment, job duties, class, part-time, full-time, casual, hours of work, probationary period, termination clause, compensation, and the risk mitigation. Layoffs, termination, or progressive discipline is what I recommend. I recommend a layoff clause because under COVID, layoffs did happen in non-union environments, but the ESA still says that unless you have a layoff clause, if you lay someone off, you're actually terminating them. So then avoiding conflict, reason to have those difficult conversations. And Stacy, you'll know this. So information gaps are filled in. A difficult conversation can build trust and it prevents escalations for the most part. So some free HR resources. So kind of my tagline is when a template's not enough. So when a template's not enough, that's when you contact me to help. There's a lot of templates available, but again, before you implement, ask yourself, is this union, non-union? Do I need someone to do a quick overview to make sure I'm compliant? So there's AIHR. They have some good things on their website. HUMI is a Canadian company. They've got lots of things. Business Development Bank Canada has some great resources. Rippling is, I think it's American, but they have a Canadian branch. They do a lot of things around payroll and also managing global payroll, which I don't think we are there yet, but also good resources. And then industry associations. So if you're a member of the local chamber, they have an HR service that has a lot of templates on it, right? Manufacturers, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Retail Council, Tourism Industry Association. There's also the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And as you all know, we can and Invest Kingston also have resources available. But these are things where you can find one-offs or a template, or you're looking for ideas to guide you. And I use them too, because I don't need to recreate the wheel. I'm just, polishing things to be compliant and to make sure that it's in line with my clients' mission, vision, and values, right? Then workplace conflict, so crucial conversations, and I know Stacy put it in the chat. The other thing that I'm a big proponent of is a respectful workplace and conflict resolution policy, because people are not comfortable with conflict, and oftentimes a misunderstanding will become larger than it needs to be, and then you're an employer faced with a harassment complaint. So this is kind of the setting the tone for your business, how you expect people to interact with one another, and giving them a conflict management process and if possible, training them in it. So the Health PEI has a really good downloadable respectful workplace guide that also takes everybody through the steps of having the conversation. It's got some good graphics. I mean, it's meant for healthcare, so there's some other things, what they do internally with that conflict, but it's really good. And the city of Calgary has an amazing workplace, respectful workplace program on their website that takes them through defining, this is the behavior, this is respectful, this is not respectful. Here's what happens if I feel disrespectful. Like, it's really comprehensive and it's a great tool, and you can just pick and choose what would apply to your business. And I think it's, again, there's so many resources available, but these ones I thought were very helpful. And in terms of diversity and inclusion, there's the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion toolkits. Indigenous Work has some toolkits. There's other organizations where I've been able to download like anti-racism and anti-oppression toolkits and definitions and things to educate myself. I am not working in that space because I am not living in that space. Right. But there are local people that do work in these areas, but there are excellent resources that define things like microaggressions and all of the things that can come up in the workplace and give very specific examples, definitions of allyship, all of the things in a complex working environment. So these are really good as well.
Great. So if you want to just share your contact information, I did put your, Carey's website there. Just for sake of time, I do want to thank you for all of the questions that everyone brought forward today. I would encourage you to reach out if you are unable to find any of those resources when you Google. Again, you can rewatch this workshop, which will be on the website. If you can't find them, maybe reach out to Carey, and she might have some of them on the website already. But do use her just as a point person. She's not going to like counsel you for free for an hour. I don't think that's certainly not her business model, but we certainly respect that. We would hire Carey if she were to, engage with us further. But certainly if you have, one of those resources that you missed, for instance, by all means, please do reach out to her. Carey, thank you on behalf of all of us. This was a really rich discussion. We just scratched the surface, but that's business. That's the way it goes. So thank you so much. I do appreciate it. Thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.